Art yourself alive. Art yourself alive. Art yourself alive. Art yourself alive. Art Yourself Alive podcast with your host Vikki Parker, sharing lived experience stories of the power of creativity to support your mental health and well-being. So welcome to the podcast episode today. And I want to bring a really, really warm welcome to my very, very good friend, Annie Murray. She is just an amazing, amazing inspiration to have on this show. Annie, I think your story is absolutely incredible and really inspirational. And the impact of the way in which you share that wisdom in the community is also incredible. So just to say hello, Annie, welcome. How are you?
Hi, Vikki. Well, first of all, I'm excited. I'm so excited to have been asked on this. And I love this podcast and the meaning behind it. Just it excites me because it's the exact approach that I have to creativity and business and my life. So yes. I was dead keen to come on here and obviously to speak to a good friend who I've known for 3-4 years now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've done many amazing things together in the past, and we've shared our stories, on many of the same platforms in the past as well. So yes, for the listeners, this is Annie Murray. She is a beacon of light in the community. She is the founder and CEO of a film and media production company called Edit Suite Limited. She is also the founder of Horizon. It's a charitable group that brings amazing work into the community using creativity in support of addiction and addiction recovery. And we will get much more into that a bit later. And she'll be able to tell you her story and tell you how she is spreading that arty wisdom into the lives of other people who are really ready to take up that mantle for themselves, because that's what this podcast is about. This podcast is about you understanding as the listener that there may be some challenges that you had in your life or that are having in your life, but that there are also some very simple and accessible tools through creative process that you can then use to support yourself in healing through that process and through that journey. And Annie, the reason why I want to talk to you is because you are absolutely a shining example of that, of using creative process to be able to bring yourself through some very, very challenging times. So before we do that, let's dig in to the essence of why I bring any kind of creative work to anybody. And that is this playful, childlike spirit that's within all of us, to play, to be free, to just be in complete flow, and to just be not mindful of anything else other than being in the zone. And what I want to invite all of my guests to do is to just tap into some childhood memories of your own, of where you remember being in that zone, being in that playful space. Please tell us about that.
For me?
Yes, for you.
I want to hear everybody's story, everybody else's story. I was waiting for a whole room full to respond then. For me, the playful space, it's connecting my childhood to my adulthood. And, through my addictions, which is part of my story, my downfall, my problem, my nemesis, I was in addiction for about 15 years where I was not creative, not one jot. And it was a dark, dark space. My mind was controlled with drink and drugs. It was controlled solely by having this poison put into my body on a daily basis. I was completely addicted and dependent. So I had no space for creativity. I had no space to be playful. People think that if you're on drink and drugs all the time, you're going to be fun, you're going to be playful, you're going to be silly, you're going to be childish, when actually my reality was a horrible space of self-loathing, depression, sadness, and this real kind of numbness to all of my creativity. So for 15 years, I lost out big time. But in my recovery, in 6 years of recovery, I found my playfulness again and my creativity through my playfulness. So that had to very much connect to my childhood, of course, and we all remember times you know, when we're little and we have our little art aprons that we put on at school, they used to make a funny noise and they used to smell weird. You know, all these strange nostalgic smells and sights and memories pop back into my mind personally. But I came from a really creative family, and there was a lot of music. There was a lot of arts and crafts. My mum would always be setting us up with some knitting or some paints or some crayons. And, you know, we'd literally create most of the time. We didn't spend a whole lot of time watching TV and things like that. It was either real activity, sports, games. But, you know, for me, everything sort of goes back to performance-based playfulness. I used to love dressing up, being in plays, being a different character. I used to find it quite safe as well. Pretending to be someone else was quite safe for me. I think that my insecurities used to lead me to believe that actually I wasn't good enough on my own. So through acting and singing and performing and playing around with that, I found parts of myself. I could be more confident. I could be, you know, somebody different. So I enjoyed that very much. But, you know, my mum's actually a world famous artist. She's a sculptor. So, I mean, that has grown over the years. But since I was little, you know, the whole the way of working was to get up, do your arts and crafts, create these things, build it up into a collection, sell it at craft fairs at weekends, be a bit of a salesperson as well as a photographer, as well as the creator. So that was normal. You know, going into an office 9 to 5 was not normal. So my family are very playful, very creative, very open-minded with what's possible. And I think that stood me in good stead as to how you know, what future I saw for myself. It didn't have to be, you know, 9 to 5 in an office or going to university. It didn't have to be any of those things. But, you know, my playfulness lasted right into my college years. My childhood playing, I went into a theatrical school where Kate Winslet had just had her Titanic fame. So I was really honoured to have been selected as one of the students there, and they were 2 of my happiest years in the world ever, because I got to dress up and play all day long. So, you know, a huge chunk of my life up until addiction was about playing, basically.
That's really interesting, because as you're speaking, I completely resonate with the idea because of dressing up and being another character, because my background, as you know, is also in theatre. And as you've just talked about your family there, something just really struck me.
Okay.
It's like you've had a really clear experience of the pathway from being in the playful space to really executing it and making it into a thing and making it into a business or a career or something like that, giving you that awesome permission not to have to do anything else with your life, but be able to pursue creativity, which is great. So I'm wondering, where in that was just the creativity just for you?
Aha. Okay. So that's an interesting one, because obviously that, you know, it leads to earning money and it's a business. And
yes,
it was very much ingrained in me that kind of, you know, art can be a business. It can be a way of life. It is a way of life. Absolutely.
It is. Yeah.
A way of life. But for me, I used to love films a lot. So I would recreate scenes in my bedroom on my own. I was not an only child, but my brother and sister were a lot older, so I didn't have them to play with. They were too old to play with me. I was too little. And so I'd recreate scenes from one of my favorites was Waterworld. Do you remember, with Kevin Costner?
I do.
And I used to pretend I was on this boat that I owned, and I was, you know, growing my plants, and I was, you know, grabbing things out of the sea. So I would, you know, my bed was my boat, and, you know, I had a lot of kind of fantasy in that. But for me, the creativity, the real arty side, I never really sort of link music to art, but it is an art form. Absolutely is an art form. So when I was 8, I was given my first guitar, and I've been playing ever since. And I turned that into a bit of a career. Really, I became a professional singer-songwriter. I had albums and record deals and bands, and I play regularly up in London, support some amazing big artists as I grew older. But when I was younger, learning chords, learning the guitar, that escapism, that ability to just let yourself go in your little bedroom, playing around, singing, and then getting that thrill. I remember, and I still get it occasionally, that thrill when you hear a really good melody, or you've come up with something, or some words come together. And, you know, I was only 8, but by the time I was 14, I was playing in the local cellar bar. It was a local club, singer-songwriter club. So I started young with that, and it became a very real thing for me to become a pop star, really, a bit of a music star.
Yeah.
That was my first dream. So, you know, I didn't think small. It wasn't just a bit of creativity. I wanted to show the world. I wanted to share with the world what I'd created. And I think, you know, only up until recently have I realized the importance of music and how it connects people. Because I used to think it was just for me, and it's not. It's very much your words, your melodies, your creation that comes together that other people can connect with and not feel so alone, you know, with heartbreak, with disappointments, with the joyful moments too. So actually a lot of my songs were very happy, because I had nothing really much terrible to write about at the age of 8.
I think that's really interesting that you're making a distinction there, because there is a distinction. The creative process in and of itself is huge for the internal landscape of the person. And then there's the other step of allowing that to be witnessed and allowing that to be shared by other people. And
Absolutely.
those two things are not necessarily joined.
No, not at all.
They're very, very different animals. So I'm loving that you expressed that you had that in the zone moment when you were, you know, with the excitement of the chords and the melodies and stuff like that. And then that awareness for yourself that there is a possibility to share, and there is a possibility to impact other people with, you know, the arts that you create, because we are all in a collective experience. We are all walking each other home, looking at this emotional landscape that we're all living in, looking at the external and the internal. And artists have an enormous role to play, don't they, in allowing us to identify with something else that somebody else is doing. And of course, music, like you say, is the language of the universe. It's the language of the world. It's the language without words that everybody can understand. And so I totally resonate with that as well. But I just really wanted to make that distinction that you can be creative and it's not small, even if nobody else sees it. And I wondered what your thoughts are on that.
There's things that I do that aren't shared. Absolutely. There's things that I've done in the past. I used to paint a lot. I used to love doing portraits, and, you know, big, you know, massive canvases of famous people. I used to have a bit of a fascination with famous people. So I'd get my black and white, you know, paints out, and I would think big, and I would create these big images of these well-known people. And I did try to start selling them when I was fairly young, you know, but I think my self-esteem got the better of me. I could see imperfections, and I was never happy. I was never happy with the finished result. You know, looking back, there's some amazing pictures, and one actually, I did a Bob Marley picture, and it got bought by an American museum, and you know, something to be really proud of. But I think after that, I stopped, because that pressure. I think it became a pressure to create, you know, to order for customers. Putting it out online, I felt really vulnerable, so I stopped. And now I just do it for myself, as my release. You know, it's fun, it's lovely to see something coming together, and also I can make mistakes and keep them to myself, so it's safe.
And there's that's a huge deal, isn't it, to be able to make mistakes and keep it to yourself.
Yeah, I think mistakes are the way that we learn. So I learned that from my mum. She would sculpt many faces over the years, and some really funny faces come out. You know, some really ugly ones, some really lopsided ones, you know, and they went in the bin, and that's fine. But she shared that with us as kids, and we, you know, we could see the trial and error, we could see the mistakes, we could see that she was striving for perfection. So we were taught that perfection is really what you want to put out in the world, and that's not a great thing, because actually, you know, I've been to see gigs, and some of the best gigs I've ever seen is where the artists, your big idols, are on stage in front of you and they get it wrong, but you feel more connected to them because that makes them human. You know. So actually, we've got to maybe not strive for perfection so much, but really see it as a process, and sharing that process, warts and all, I think is really, really important. And yes, it's vulnerable. Yes, it's hard. And you might have some regrets, but you know what? I don't have regrets with what I've shared with the world, with my creativity. But there's certain things that I'd rather keep just for me, you know, just that private time. I think it's important. But there's definitely stuff worth sharing, and it doesn't have to be perfect, ever.
which is absolutely my motto too. I'm all about the process, all about the approaching the blank page with a sense of curiosity, and you being the observer of what comes for you and seeing what arises, and just allowing that space to be filled with whatever comes and having no control over it, just bypassing that need for control, which is why I work in a channeled way with my pencils. It's why I work in an abstract way with my paints. I don't want to know what the finished outcome it looks like. No, I don't want to know before.
That's maybe my mistake, was aiming for someone's face, which is very, very particular. You know,
very
if you get that wrong,
yes.
you're gonna notice it. So I think maybe I've picked the wrong subject. maybe I should start with more abstract and.
Well, maybe you honed some painting skills with a subject that you could identify with, and now you can take it somewhere else.
Indeed. I mean, the options are just endless,
aren't they?
Art and creativity. So yeah, there's always be a million other things that I'm about to do, but I don't know it yet.
Exactly. So moving on then, with that backdrop of the, you know, the richness of creative process, creative experience in your life, take us into your story now about the challenge that you had to move through.
Yeah, it's not the greatest of stories, but it's certainly something that I've come through successfully. So I was mentioning earlier about how I used to pretend all the time. I was pretending to be someone else. I would be a performer. I would sing my songs, and there was always a mask in front of me, hiding, I suppose, me. I didn't feel confident enough just being me. I had to present something. I had to show something. I had to be somebody else. And I think when I left college and my world turned into a world of auditioning up in London with thousands of other applicants, amazing dancers and singers, people who would blow your socks off. And I just felt so inadequate in the big wide world. I wasn't prepared for the big wide world, and I wasn't prepared for the amount of rejection that I got on a daily basis. You know, a lot of theatre, acting, singing work, you have to audition, and you will ultimately, you know, 9.9 times out of 10, you'll be turned away. And that became really hard. So you focus your dreams on going on the X Factor or some of these big girl band auditions or some big West End theatre productions. And it's just an almost maybe, but not quite. There's something wrong with you. You don't quite fit. You know, someone once told me at college that, you know, in a room full of people, no one would notice me. And that stuck with me a long, long time. So with that in mind, I started, I didn't really want to touch drink or drugs, and certainly not drugs. I wouldn't even touch a paracetamol. So drink for me was something that came in my early 20s because I had an alcoholic childhood. One of my parents was an alcoholic, and I didn't want to touch some stuff. But when I did start drinking, I found, like many people do, this confidence, this self-assured kind of brave, exciting, those thrills, that rush, the buzz that you get initially from a drink. And I used to think that I was a somebody with a drink in me. So I used to think I was much better with alcohol in my system. Hey, so what happened? I just started drinking all the time. You know, it went from very much not just a couple of social drinks with my friends, but it was for auditions. It was to get up out of bed in the morning eventually. And it was then, over the years, it was 24/7. I used it before gigs, big performances in the West End. I used it during, you know, to wet the whistle, and I used it to come down afterwards. I was describing recently about how, you know, you'd finish a show somewhere and you see the auditorium empty and kind of a part of your soul empties. It's like whoosh, all that cheer, all that joy is gone. You can't take that home with you. So I used to take bottles of wine home instead, and that used to fill that void, I suppose. So, you know, over the years that did take its toll. My music started to struggle. I had a record deal at the time, and basically one of my co-writers, he caught testicular cancer at the age of 24. And instead of supporting that, I ran away. I ran away to Australia. But I didn't realize that you actually take your problems with you. So I learned in Australia that I had to come home and get help. So I moved in with my parents, and I think they realized for the first time the extent of my drinking and how bad and how ill I really, really was. And the next few years, I mean, they battled to try and get me well. They put me into rehabs where I'd escape. I've jumped from first floor windows. I've woken up in fire cupboards in blocks of flats. I've, you know, walked through miles in the snow with just my bare feet. and ended up with frostbite. I've fallen asleep in the bushes in the snow. I used to like the snow a lot. But this was all drink focused. It was all because that was all I had. I gave up work, I gave up music, I gave up my creativity, everything. I had nothing but drink. So with that in mind, my parents had no choice but to walk away. I ended up being evicted from a flat in Reading, and for the first time I found myself street homeless in Reading, which is where I was born originally. And yeah, from there it's months and years of street living in various different parts of the country. So I would be taken in to places around Bristol, Newbury, Reading. I eventually ended up in Brighton, which is where my world changed. But you know, we're talking maybe 2 years of street living, and or being taken in temporarily into hostels, which is another horrific place to exist in the world. I've been arrested countless times. I've been put into a prison on remand because, you know, they didn't know what to do with me. And I was a repeat offender because I had one focus, and that was to steal wine because I couldn't afford it. I did partake in drug taking when I could. That became a thing for quite some time. You know, but I found myself in Brighton eventually. And thank God I did. And that, you know, I would never leave this place. It's given me a life beyond my wildest dreams, really, because I spent 2 years, I got taken off the streets, basically. And people are always interested in how you go from street living to a normal life. You know, I'm now a homeowner with a business and car, and, you know, I've got friends and family and a beautiful life now. But what was the stepping stone? And basically I was assaulted really badly back in 2014. And I ended up in hospital, beaten black and blue, with 168 pictures of my body taken with all the various different injuries, cracked ribs, head CT scans had to be done. I wasn't allowed to see myself in the mirror for 6 weeks because they feared that would leave a lasting memory that would not be good for my recovery. I had many people supporting me, and I had police escorts everywhere with me because this man who did rape and assault me on the street was still out there large, and approaching me from time to time. So I got used to a life of going shopping with a police officer undercover. You know, this was normal for me. And eventually I think they got me into a hostel, a 52-bed hostel. It was a wet hostel, which means that people in there were using. They are supported, they have key workers. And it's just basically that daily, you know, you have to wash, you have to eat, you have to do all of these things, but you also have a roof over your head. So you can just lay in your room and you can drink all day long if you need to, if you want to. And that's not great. But something in me changed in those 2 years that I was there. And actually, what happened was that someone had given me a drug whilst I was there, and it caused havoc with my body. So I ended up being rushed into hospital with my heart out of rhythm. I couldn't breathe. I was blue lighted into the hospital at very fast speed. I remember that. I remember clinging onto doctors' coats. You know, for the first time in my life, I realised I didn't actually want to die. And all those years, I put myself in such peril, such dangerous situations, drinking myself to oblivion, taking drugs on top of the drink. I mean, I shouldn't really exist today, Vikki, if I'm honest. Yeah. You know, my body has been through a lot, but it survived. But this time I nearly didn't. And when I went to shut my eyes, I shut my eyes with this blind faith, just blind faith that I would open them again, you know. And I won't kill the end of the story, but surprise, I did wake up. But this time something was different. This time, that realization that I didn't want to die, that I wanted to see my family, that I had nieces and nephews that I wanted to connect with. I didn't know what my future looked like, but I knew I had to be different. So immediately, the first thing I did was actually sat with the woman opposite me. I was incredibly ill. I couldn't eat solids. I was weak. I could barely walk. I would take myself over to this older lady opposite me, who was struggling with liver failure, kidney failure, all sorts of terrible things in her old age. And I'd just read these romantic novels to her that she'd brought along into hospital. So that was my focus, was to focus on someone else, to support someone else. And that realization, actually, I can be somebody to someone. I can be needed by someone. But by the end of it, she was asking me to come over, you know, and read to her. And I loved that feeling of being needed and being a person that needed to be needed by someone. Loneliness. I could see loneliness was in her, and I knew that feeling. So I felt that I could be someone to help with that. So, and then started the recovery story. You know, luckily I'd dabbled my little toes into recovery, and I'd gotten to know a few people and an organization that actually ran a film course. And I got invited onto a film course, which, I mean, I could see it wasn't a brilliant film course, but it planted a brilliant seed, and that is worth its weight in gold, because from there I was given a camera every so often, I was given a laptop here and there, and I was able to kind of piece pieces of film together. And I found, you know, with my love of film, with my love of music, with my love of acting and theatre, I was able to piece together a way of creating that was safe. And that again touches on what we were talking about earlier, this safe creation of something I can perfect if I want. It doesn't have to be perfect. I can make it perfect in edit. But I could piece something together that was visual, it was audio, and you could put it out into the world and share it with people, share stories, share dreams and music and the most amazing things. So eventually I started getting paid by little small businesses locally, you know, not much, but I started to earn some money. So I started a limited company. And Edit Suite was running for about a year when I realized that actually it didn't have to just be a business. It was put to me that actually it could run as a social enterprise, and I could help other people, because I had this need to help other people. I had this want to give back to me what was freely given to me, you know, skills and an idea and a planting of a seed. So I wanted to do that with other people, because I knew that my life had changed for the better. I got out of the hostel, I was in my own flat, I'd started dating and meeting friends, and I had my recovery groups, and I was growing stronger by the minute. And I had a business, you know, so I knew that it was possible. And from there, I mean, it's been 6 years of the same, and growing that business and growing everything within it. But it was put to me that I started a social enterprise, and that's where I started the community group Horizon, which is basically, it's a film course for people who can come on and learn everything from camera operations, sound engineering, editing, storyboarding, the whole lot, color grading, everything. They can come and just have a go. And more than that, they can come and be with like-minded people who are going through the same thing. And they can connect on that level where they can go, oh, I'm not alone. You know, for the first time, I'm not alone, and I can share and say what I want. I can make mistakes if I want. I can play. I can turn up and not feel like I have to engage, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
You know, initially the film course for me, it would be amazing if people just turned up for a cup of tea and a biscuit and a chat, you know, but if they learned something, then that's a bonus. So for me, the community group's been running since 2019, and it gets bigger and better every year. And we help so many people, and the impact, we've been doing impact measurements over the years, and we get something like 80% completing the course. We get 75% of those people going on to further education and training, or starting their own small business, or going into employment. And that ideally is what we want to do long term, and that's what we're doing long term, is helping people bridge a gap to normal living, and literally find themselves in a world where creativity is a way of life, you know, and playfulness and fun and connectivity and sharing stories and sharing arts and crafts and music and every art form that there is. Mine happens to be, you know, film and photography, but it's not everyone's boat. But in that, there's sound and music and all sorts of things. So,
I mean, it's an amazing story that you have, and I really want to honor you for telling your story so candidly, Annie, because there are a lot of people that might be listening that are going through very dark times of their own, or have been through very dark times, and may have seen a small light at the end of the tunnel for themselves, but have just not known where to start or where to go, or had, you know, a story of hope that they can pin their own hope on. So first of all, thank you for, you know, telling that in the way that you've done. And but also just to move back to when you began Horizon, which 3 or 4 years ago, because I did that first course with you. You were offering spaces on it for people that were in recovery, in AA style recovery, because I was at the time going through CODA, which is the codependency recovery. I thought, right, I'm going to do that. I'm going to go and see what that's like to be around those kind of like-minded people. And I'd really like to learn them skills. And what I found, just to sell it a little bit more for you, because it's just so fabulous. It doesn't really need selling, but it's just so rich in what you were offering initially, right at the beginning, in terms of that freedom of expression. You included theatre in it, which was obviously fabulous for me. And there was arty things and using drawing boards and getting the actual hands on the photography equipment. And I know for me, it revolutionized the way I used my phone camera.
Yes,
it was just so accessible for me. Do you remember that
the light bulb moment? Yeah, your picture. Yeah, it ended up in the Brighton Fringe, and we got shortlisted for the award that year because
exactly
the photography was amazing. So yeah, that did come from that.
So that sparked a whole thing in me. So, you know, I've gone on to do a lot more learning about graphic design and using software and, you know, and stuff like that. And that just opened up an enormous new universe of things for me, because my creative process has been very much hands-on, organic, real life, pencils, paint, in the room, theatre, dance, embodiment. But it helped me move into the digital space, which has helped my business and my practice. Like, I mean, there's no limit to what I can do. The more and more I learn, I can do that. And I just wanted to thank you again, because I've thanked you a million times, but thank you again for planting that seed for me, that I was able to, you know, to acquire those technical skills. Because it's a big deal. It's a big deal picking up a 35mm camera and not really knowing what all the buttons do.
And I think it's that fear of tech, and I think it's that fear of the film production industry or the photography industry, because these cameras are complex, laptops are complex, all the software, editing software, it's really difficult. And I'm self-taught in this. I started only 6 years ago, and I only got my first DSLR 4 years ago. So and since then my film and photography has gone right up there. It's much more professional now. But when I started, it was a handy cam and it was just pressing a button, but I was still able to have clients and paid work and get going. You know, we shouldn't let the fear of tech stop us from trying these things. And that's why making film and photography accessible to people without the technical jargon, I think it's so important, because it's such a creative.
And you're very good at translating things into a very accessible language. And because it's very practical and hands-on, people really get the opportunity to prove to themselves in really small steps that it is okay for them. And also what I'd like to do is I'd like to just highlight the fact that when you're creating a group that has a very clear and transparent focus in terms of the community that it's serving, in terms of addiction recovery community that you are serving there, you come to that creativity with a different level of consciousness. And I think there's a really interesting comparison to be made in terms of the story that you've already spoken about. You've been in this creative world, but you were also living kind of a dual life of this, all of these creative skills and talents that you have, but not feeling like that you were actually had enough value in just you as yourself. So using that as a mask. So there's a disconnect there. But when you move into a community where you're very clear about what people's challenges are, there is no hiding in what you're doing now.
Absolutely.
And so
not.
the creative space becomes a very different beast, doesn't it, when you're that transparent?
Yeah, definitely. And I think sharing my story helped. It helped in the rooms. That's what AA is. That's what CA is.
Yeah.
You know, you go in and share daily and you connect and you go, that happened to me. Not quite the same story, but you can connect. And I think for me, that whole telling of the story and people going, wow, amazing. Well done, you. I started to think, wow, there's real value in my story. So let's make it count. And I think that turned for me, because I was filled with guilt and shame. The fact that I've been in prison, the fact that I've lived on the streets and woken up in the most disgusting of states, like things that I probably wouldn't share with people. But there's certainly a lot of guilt and shame. And it's not a story that I thought I would ever willingly share. But now it has a purpose. Yeah. And that transparency helps others to connect. And it helped to form the business, the social enterprise. You know, it's being recognized for being something authentic because it's come from someone with that lived experience.
Yes.
And lived experience is worth its weight in gold. So for me, my story has purpose. Every single hard step of the way now has a meaning. And for me, that's full circle. So I know now that I can put myself out there completely raw, transparent, open, no filters, boundaries, nothing. I am me. And you know what? I'm celebrated more for it. Yes. And I think people are celebrated for their flaws, just like artwork should be celebrated for its flaws. It should be celebrated because it's not quite right. And we should be celebrating the imperfections, because that's what makes it different. And I remember being at school, even dressing slightly differently, and my mum going, yeah, but you're an individual, you're unique, you're different. But it wasn't celebrated. You know, kids weren't allowed to be different. They weren't allowed to challenge fashion and makeup and the things that they did. But, you know, in my recovery, I see a world in Brighton where people are celebrated for being different, unique, themselves, open, honest. And I'm in a beautiful community where, you know, I meet people like you and so many others that are like us. And we're all a bit different. And we should be celebrating that every single day. And sometimes we just forget. You know, and we can slip into our old selves where self-doubt, you know, kind of the self-esteem is down, everything is low. And we, you know, that's what a good recovery is to keep yourself on tip-top form in that way. And that's where creativity on a daily basis is so crucial for mental health, for recovery, and for life, basically. Art yourself alive, isn't that?
Art yourself alive, exactly. Really? I mean, I've called it this because of my story, you know, because I wouldn't be here without my opportunities that I had to fully express the emotional life that I was living, that was not allowed to be spoken publicly as a truth. So in the same way that you were talking about, I hid behind it, but I hid behind the anonymity of it, not because I didn't have a value for who I was, but because being who I was dangerous. So I used the anonymity of the artwork and the writing and the characters in the theatre in order to express, have that cathartic experience, whilst nobody would know that that's my real truth coming through.
Interesting. So
yeah, so
slightly different approach, but
slightly different approach. So it's just to see that there's a vehicle for you. It seems like that the vehicle was to try on personas to think about your worth and your identity. And for me, it was to try on these personas and put these masks on in order to safeguard my actual safety. Yeah.
All in protection of our little selves.
All in protection of little selves, exactly. And that's why I started this conversation about that spark from when you were a child.
Yeah.
That spark of freedom and curiosity and lightheartedness that is innate in everybody. And perhaps people don't have a childhood full of play and wild memories.
No, many don't, unfortunately.
Many don't. But everybody must have a moment in their life at some point where they've been able to just access some kind of play or some kind of joy in whatever format.
No, absolutely. There was a definitive moment when I was in that hostel trying to think of ways in which I could get better, right? And I couldn't see my life or hitting my head on the pillow without a drink in me. I could not see it for the love of God. I couldn't see it. And there was this one opportunity came up because they knew I liked to play guitar. They gave me this old broken thing. They fixed the neck on it, glued it back together, gave me this beaten up old thing, and I started to play in my room. And some people overheard me within the hostel, and they're like, "Oh, you're good." I was like, "I haven't played in years, but this is for me. This is for me in my room." But one day, one of the key workers, he came in and he said, "Look, my daughter runs the Chaley Heritage School for kids with disabilities, really severe disabilities. But they love having people come in and play music for them. So we were wondering if you'd like to come in." And, you know, for the first time in many years, 13, 14, nearly 14 years, I think this was, without a drink in me, I wanted to start curbing the drink so that I could turn up to these kids, to this home and play and to be coherent and not to fall over and be silly and be so drunk that I'm falling asleep. I wanted to, so it was a real learning curve that creativity helped me to just go, do you know what? I'm not going to take that second drink. I'm not going to take that third. I'm not going to overdo it. I'm just going to give myself enough so I don't go into withdrawal, and I'll give myself enough and I will play for them. And then afterwards I can do what I want. But the thing is, it planted the seed, it planted a routine, it planted that whole thing of actually there are things to work towards. So being given that opportunity to share my creativity, which is what I've always wanted to do, to be given that opportunity at a time, it was crucial. it was really crucial, and I'll never forget that opportunity. And the kids would come out and bang drums and, you know, play things along with my music. And yeah, it was such an amazing opportunity, and that creativity in front of those people, and I could see the challenging lives that they had ahead of them that was no choice of their own, you know, and it really makes you think. So I was sat here thinking, I'm really privileged. I'm lucky to be alive. I'm lucky to be supported right now. I've got a roof over my head. Let's do something. So I started to really dig my heels in and look towards detoxing properly and a proper recovery. But another one of those hugely important seeds that without it, I don't know. I just don't know.
And just one of those seeds, it so resonates there that you'd really tapped into that little light of self-worth, that you were worth enough.
Yes.
To just ground yourself in the presence that you had the capacity for at that time, to enjoy that creative process of performing without the kind of like West End expectations.
No expectations.
No? I mean, lovely.
Yeah, they were so happy, warts and all. It didn't matter what came out of my mouth. They were happy just that someone was in front of them with a guitar making a noise. Yeah, you're right. The expectation was low. It wasn't some big flash stage. I could be what I wanted. Yeah. And it was one of the most joyful days that I've had, you know, in addiction. and
the symbolism, Annie, of the broken guitar with the neck that had been fixed. Can't let that escape.
Yeah, and it was all meant to be, and you know, it doesn't matter what kind of noise it makes. I think, again, warts and all, that whole broken, I was a broken thing too, and I was making the best noise that I could at that time. And how healing that was for the whole room, for all those kids, the staff, and for myself. More for me than for them. Amazing.
I love that the idea that anything creative, whether that be movement or collaging or drawing or painting or music or stringing lyrics together, all of these things are a practice in piecing ourselves back together.
Yeah, we're all just being pieced together with gold and becoming these.
Exactly. Yes, I love that. That's kintsugi, isn't it? The kintsugi Japanese practice of putting the broken pot back together. And we've all got our experiences. We've all got traumas that might need some processing. We've all got parts of ourselves, simply because of the nature of the world that we live in, that pushes and pulls us with expectation about who we should be, who we could be, you know, rather than sitting with just exactly who we are and being allowed to have that freedom of expression, whatever medium it comes through.
Definitely. And you know, in my recovery, I've definitely recognized from what you've just said then, I've found myself being with certain people, and I've been pretending to be this version of Annie who's amazing. They think this is amazing, so I better be that person. And it's dangerous ground. And actually, I went to therapy to get that sorted, because I had this massive connection with addiction all over again. I didn't touch drink or drugs, but I felt in my brain that addictive nature coming through, whereby I had to hide behind the best clothes, the nicest meals out, the most expensive things that I could lavish these people with, the most interesting gigs and photography exhibitions, and all to impress someone and be somebody who actually I wasn't. There are some days where I'm not going to be okay. There's some days where I'm going to be vulnerable. There's some days where my dress sense isn't quite normal. You know, forgive me for these things, but you don't have to forgive me anything, because I am me, and this is a part of me. So actually, to you know, 6 years into my recovery, to find myself putting on a persona in order to please someone else was a real learning curve, and that was recent.
It's the same story recycled, isn't it?
It is completely, but I knew the warning signs this time.
Yes,
and I sought help straight away, and I'm still recovering from that, and now connecting again back with people who just let me be me and celebrate me for being me.
So that's lovely link there. Who is Annie to Annie?
Annie's just a big kid. Annie's a big kid who's just doing her growing up later in life. Annie is incredibly resilient and strong. Annie is creative without a doubt, but she doesn't always believe that her stuff is the best out there. But she's starting to learn that it doesn't matter, and that actually perfection is something I've got to let go of. You know, there's a certain expectation with my films for corporate clients and things, that, you know, but I'm incredibly proud of myself. And I don't often say that. And to say that out loud today is a big thing for me, because I think when you start saying things out loud, you start to believe it. But Annie had a purpose in life, and it might have been to have gone completely wrong, to be put right again, to be sharing that with others. And this is my purpose. My purpose now is not to get an Oscar or a BAFTA or a you know, a Brit Award. That is stuff that I'm happy in a room full of like-minded people, creating stuff where I become blinkered in the creativity. I'm like one of those show ponies, which just, I can't see anything else but what's in front of me. And I am in that zone. I can't hear you. I can't see anything around me. I'm just in that creative, artistic space. And that is where Annie thrives. That is my safe space. It's my, God, it's my world within the world. You know, it's absolutely mine, and no one can touch it because it's only me in there. So it's an interesting place to be, but yeah.
And in that sense, how are you using your creative process now to, there's a phrase that I really love, and it's rehearse the possible. How do you rehearse the possible for yourself to increase your own capacity to thrive, to love yourself a little bit more than you did yesterday? How do you use it to rehearse that possibility?
Rehearse the possibility. It's an interesting phrase, because my life was all about rehearsals. Everything had to be rehearsed to be as perfect as it could be on stage. So I do love that phrase. I think for me, it's learning that fear doesn't control me. And what I mean by that is that if there's something that is in my head to create or do or achieve, so for example, running a year-long course rather than just six safe little weeks, I have pushed myself to the absolute limit, and I've put myself out of my comfort zone. But now it's happening, I feel the most enormous sense of pride and joy and excitement at what lays ahead, you know. And I'm always challenging myself with bigger dreams, because I tend to reach those dreams and go, okay, what's next? Because I've achieved that, you know. I'm 6 years in, I've got, like I said, I've got my business, my charity, my home, my family, my friends, a beautiful life. So what is next? And next for me is to grow the business so I can reach more people. It terrifies the life out of me, but living in fear is no way to live. It would hold me back in so many ways, you know, connecting with people, relationships, family. You know, my business is my life as well as all the people around me. So it's a part, it's intrinsic to me. It has to be a part of my daily life. So I've got to rid myself of the fear and realize that actually, no matter how big the dreams, it's all possible. It's all possible. So it's just doing it day by day, chipping away and sitting with the discomfort of fear as well. And noticing it for what it is, not turning to a drink or a drug to numb it and get rid of it, because fear is where we thrive. It's where I thrive. It's not comfortable, it's not easy. But out the other side is that knowledge that you've overcome a fear. And it's huge. And it makes you stronger every day. It makes you much more resilient in the long term, you know? So I hope that answers.
We need to build resilience for ourselves, don't we? We need to know that we're okay, whoever we are, whatever we're doing. And we need to be able to face those empty spaces, like the blank page, like your empty film roll. I know we don't use film roll anymore, but it's that possibility of the unknown and stepping into the unknown and not needing it to be any particular way. That's for me the crux of moving through fear.
Absolutely. The fear of the unknown is a terrifying thing, but you never know what you're going to find. That's what I'll always say. And the most amazing.
We make friends with that.
You definitely have to. You have to, and it will take a while, but it's worth every second of that unsettled feeling that we get, you know. So
I feel like that's a little bubble of excitement at the same time as fear, and there's a really interesting fine line between the two. And I find that lovely. I don't want it in my nervous system the whole time, 24/7, but I really appreciate it when it's there.
and you know, I do think that absolutely needs to be about. You can't live yourself sort of facing your fears every day, every minute of every day. I think it needs to be counterbalanced with all the good stuff, the meditations, time with friends, time with family, time on your own. People are forgetting to take them. I took myself out to Brighton for lunch the other day, to myself, and it was so lovely. Sat in the sun, and I just thought, you know, I'm comfortable being me in this city, looking at people. You know, I think we all need to just mix it up and make sure that we get a healthy balance of all of these things and relax into our fears a bit.
So, in summing up then, Annie, wonderful conversation. I'm so honored that we've had this conversation. But if somebody here is now listening and they're thinking, I'm in a really dark place, or I don't know where to start, I don't know what's an option for me, what would your words of wisdom be to help somebody begin planting a seed for themselves today?
Interesting. I would say if there is anything from your childhood that you used to do that you feel you've disconnected with, I'd say pick it up again. Like for me, picking up the guitar was crucial. To trust that I could relearn and to play again, to actually realize that I could do these things. Start small, and I would also say reach out to your community, have a little look online at what, just research, because it's bound to be something in recovery. Certainly there are many different platforms. There's a record label out there doing sober gigs, there's theatre companies, there's obviously my film and photography. There's so many different things and opportunities now. It's growing, it's becoming a real creative community, where there should be something out there for everyone. But it's not all about addiction and recovery. Of course, there are things for mental health and well-being, and people with all sorts of different backgrounds. Whatever it is that is holding you back, find your community, reach out. There's Facebook, there's social media, there's all these areas where people have community groups out there. And, I used to, years ago, I wouldn't want to go to an AA group. I didn't want to go to a group. The word group just freaked me out, made me feel a bit nauseous, But now there's nothing nicer than to know that there are groups of people designed to be together, to support one another. And people will always, show you around and show you what's possible. And just listen to other people's experiences, and know that actually underneath it's just day by day, one step at a time. It could go from songwriting into a bit of painting or drawing, a bit of whatever it is. And even if it's something that you feel that you cannot do, like me with film production, I would never have put myself in this position years ago of running a film production company. But here I am, all because I picked something up and tried it out one day, and I fell in love with it. So try new things, try it, just try. You've got nothing to lose, but everything to gain.
Absolutely. Day by day, step by step, nothing to lose.
Absolutely.
Yeah, really lovely message to end on. So thank you so much, Annie, for this conversation. Oh my goodness. I'm going to put your links underneath wherever this podcast is aired, so that people can see a little bit more of your work. But day by day.
Yeah. And if
anyone keep doing it
is struggling with addiction, then please do try one of the courses out. We've got plenty coming up later on in the summer, so sign on up and come on down. You're welcome for a cup of tea and just have a nose around and see what we get up to. Definitely. Thank you, Vikki. It's been a real joy.
You're very welcome, Annie. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.